debate or discussion is titled Where Next After the EU Referendum. So I'm going to move straight on to introducing our first speaker, who is Joseph Choonara, who's the leading member of the Socialist Workers Party.
Let me first say, we've said throughout Marxism that we in the SWP, despite voting leave in the referendum, have more in common with the left Remain people than we do with Nigel Farage. And this platform exemplifies that approach. I'm really, really pleased to be sharing the platform today. And I think you'll find that we have a great deal more in common than what divides us. I want to start, though, by saying a little bit about the consequences of the vote. Because the first and most immediate consequence is that David Cameron, who we will remember called the vote with supreme confidence not very long ago, has gone. He's finished. And even better than Cameron going, Cameron leaves behind a bitterly divided party. And when I say bitterly divided, the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party said yesterday that the Conservative Party is in danger of dying and risks possible collapse. And we begin to get an insight into what life must be like at public schools, because Boris Johnson stabs Cameron in the back, then Michael Gove stabs Boris Johnson in the back, and now someone I've never heard of called Andrea Ledstone has stabbed Michael Gove in the back. This is fantastic stuff. Marx talked about the ruling class as a band of hostile brothers, and we begin to see what that looks like. But on a serious note, by what right do the Conservative Party in this country get to choose the next Prime Minister? And one of the first things I want to say is I agree with Caroline Lucas when she says we need a new election in this country. I'm not going to let the Tories choose the next Prime Minister. But the implications of the vote go way beyond this country. We have to understand that the European Union has acted for many, many years as a sort of dysfunctional junior partner to American imperialism, trying to police the world system. And that European Union, which we've called a boss's club, has been badly damaged by what's happened. It has lost its second biggest member, and it's lost the key link between the European Union and NATO. It's a huge blow to the European Union. And when we say that the European Union is the boss's club, we don't just mean it's a passive collection of capitalist states. We have to understand the role that the European Union has played acting to defend capitalism and acting as a last line of defence for European capitalism. When the Greek political parties begin to buckle in policing austerity, what happens? The European Central Bank shut off the flow of money to Greek banks and give that government the alibi for backing down over the question of austerity. The French government lacks determination driving for a tax on workers. The European Commission steps in to stiffen François Hollande's resolve in driving through those attacks. The Italian government collapsed a few years ago. Mario Monti, a European commissioner, steps in to take over an unelected government, completely undemocratic. Worst of all, in Ireland, a mass movement on the streets brings down water charges, destroys water charges, makes water charges politically untenable in Irish society. The European Commission turns around and says, like it or not, you're imposing water charges on those people. The European Union has, in many ways, acted as a last line of defence for capitalism across Europe, and we have to welcome a blow to a neoliberal organisation, just as it's been welcomed by Antasia in Greece, People Before Profit in Ireland, the Left Bloc in Portugal, and many more. But it's not really just about recognising the crisis. We have to understand that the roots of the crisis go back many, many years. There has been, over decades now, a growing anti-establishment mood in Europe and a general decline of mainstream politics. We've seen aspects of that crisis in Britain with the decline of support for the major parties of British capitalism, but it's a general phenomena. In Spain, in the Spanish state, what were once the two major parties of Spanish capitalism now struggle to get 50% of the vote. If you look at Ireland, the three biggest parties, their support has fallen by 25% since 2007. If you look at Greece, a major crisis for the political system, with PASOK, the second party of Greek capitalism, virtually collapsing. This is a generalized crisis for mainstream politics on a European-wide scale. And the way I'd characterize it is this: the center ground of politics, the establishment organs are beginning to decline and collapse across Europe. Further blows will be struck, and they'll be struck from both the radical right and from the radical left. That's the reality of the crisis we're facing in Europe, and I think for us there is a lesson there. Our solution in that context cannot be to prop up the institutions of the centre ground. We have to be the radical critics of the establishment and the radical critics of the centre ground. We cannot see the mainstream politics as a barrier to racism and austerity. The barrier to racism and austerity is a mass movement from below that fights against racism and austerity. And I think we have to understand that it's a profound mistake out of fear of the right to defend the establishment. I'll give you a concrete example. The Guardian, which has become really a filthy Blairite rag in recent years, ran an article saying, who is more liberal, Theresa May or Michael Gove? Now, if your answer is Theresa May or Michael Gove, you're asking the wrong question. This is bizarre stuff. In this situation, we have to be the radical left critics of mainstream politics, or we're finished politically. Now, I want to talk in more detail about the nature of the vote against the EU. We can't afford to see the referendum as simply a vote for and against racism. It's a profound mistake to see it purely as a question in those terms. The vote was, above all else, a rebellion by working class people who feel that over decades they've had their lives torn apart by the neoliberal elite and by austerity. 2/3 of those classified as skilled, semi-skilled or unskilled workers voted for exit. 1/3 of Asian and 1/4 of black voters voted to leave. Large ethnically diverse cities like Bradford, Sheffield and Birmingham voted narrowly to leave. And if you want to understand how this is an anti-establishment vote, remember that they voted to leave in the face of opposition from the three biggest parties in Parliament, from 75% of MPs, from almost every major corporation in the UK, and almost every major institution of British or global capitalism, from the Bank of England through to the IMF and everything else as well. In the face of this establishment consensus, people voted against the EU. And I think the question for many of them traditional Labour voters as well, is why should I vote to defend an undemocratic, neoliberal institution that has done nothing to shield us from inequality and austerity? Why should I cast my vote to prop up this organisation? In the last year alone, we've seen 200,000 children plunged into poverty in Britain. What has the European Union done to help those 200,000 children? Not lifted a single finger in that situation. And that's a calculation that people make. And people say the Leave campaign lied. Of course the Leave campaign lied. But for millions of working class people, they are saying, yes, and the establishment lied to us. The Remain politicians lied to us. Everyone's been lying to us for 30, 40 years now. People have been lying to us. People feel left behind, disenfranchised, and alienated from the entirety of the political establishment. That's the reality behind the vote. Now, of course, it would be stupid to downplay the racist incidents that have taken place since the referendum. I want to make it clear that wherever we hear about racist incidents in the wake of the referendum, SWP members have gone there to defend the people under attack and to defend those communities. That's something we have stood for since long before the referendum, and it's something that we always will stand for. But I think it's important to say that there is obvious racism on the Leave side. Farage and Boris Johnson and the rest, there's no question these are racist politicians. That's actually why we insisted on running an independent left Leave campaign, the Lexit campaign in this, because we understood from the outset that racism would feature in this campaign, and we were determined that there would be a left voice for Exit that had no truck with that racism, that stood independently of that racism and didn't share platforms with racists under any circumstances. The scope of that campaign was quite limited. It was limited primarily because Jeremy Corbyn, who historically has been opposed to the European Union, took a decision to strike a bargain with his own MPs not to campaign for exit. I think that's unfortunate because we could have had a much broader, more effective Left Leave campaign. Nonetheless, that was a reality of the situation. But it was right to try to build an anti-racist, internationalist Leave campaign that had no truck with the official Leave campaigns. But I think it's also important to recognise, and I'm sure we both agree on this question, that the Leave campaign and the referendum did not invent racism in this country. There has been an unremitting barrage for years in this country of racism from establishment politicians on the Leave side and on the Remain side. Much of it came from the Remain camp as well. Take David Cameron. For all the horrible things Farage and Johnson have done, David Cameron was a man who stood up in Parliament and tried to smear Sadiq Khan as an ISIS sympathiser. Absolutely shameful. It was David Cameron's government, with Theresa May playing a key role, who drove through Parliament the most draconian immigration bill in generations, something that will make border guards of every estate agent and every employer in the country. This racism has been coming at us for generations. And it's also important to say that the Labour right has done its bit as well. I was remembered in the rows around Jeremy Corbyn of a stupid non-entity called Liam Byrne. I don't know if people know about Liam Byrne. He's one of the people who The Guardian announced with great fanfare was calling on Corbyn to go. Who is Liam Byrne? Liam Byrne is a former consultant and former merchant banker. And I remember when Liam Byrne ran in the Hodge Hill by-election in Birmingham in 2004. And I want to read from Liam Byrne's campaign leaflet, a Labour Party campaign leaflet. It said this: "We have taken tough action against those who abuse the system as a cover for economic migration. While Labour were tough, the Lib Dems were wimps. They tried to stop us taking away benefits from failed asylum seekers, and they voted against plans to speed up deportations." This from a Labour politician. Horrific. And do you want to know who the campaign manager was in Hodge Hill for Liam Byrne? Step forward, Mr. Nice Guy, Tom Watson, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. We should never let them forget these things. Corbyn and his like have been honourable exceptions to this racism, but don't forget the racism that's spewed forth from the establishment year after year after year. And in this context, two things happen. The first thing that happens is more radical right-wing forces like UKIP pick up on this racism, radicalise it, and push it further to the right. And the second thing that happens is that for working class people, anti-migrant racism can come to be seen as a symbol of wider discontent about what's been done to their lives. Now that's tragic. And we don't make concessions to racism in whatever form it comes. We make no concessions to the argument that racism is part of the problem, as sadly even some quite good Labour politicians have done in recent weeks. We have no truck with that argument. But we have to recognise that working class people can often hold in their heads a set of contradictory ideas. A combination of ideas born of solidarity and struggle on the one hand, and on the other hand, backward-looking ideas that actually fit with the mainstream ideology, the market ideology in society that sees us as isolated individuals fighting for jobs and resources. Both sides of the contradiction are important. It's an unstable combination of ideas which at times of social crisis, and we're in a moment of social crisis at the moment, can explode to the right or to the left. Our challenge in that situation is to demonstrate to working class people that it's the ruling elite and the bosses who are to blame, not immigrants, and to try to build a militant unity and struggle between migrants and non-migrants. And that's why we will include in our arguments a demand not just for free movement, but I think an immediate demand has to be for full indefinite leave to remain for EU migrants in this country at the moment, and full citizen rights for those people. It has to be central to what we're arguing. We have no truck with that racism. We don't just fight over racism, though. We are for fighting the rats that come out of the sewer, but we're also for destroying the sewer that creates the conditions in which racism can grow. We have to begin to find ways of challenging the conditions that working class people face, and that means that we also have to step up the fight over austerity. We have two great pillars to our movement, and we have to build them both. Everyone must go away from Marxism and build Stand Up to Racism, and we also have to go out and build the anti-austerity movement and build the People's Assembly. These are two great pillars of our movement, and it's wonderful that on the 16th of July, both of these great organisations are coming together in a unified demonstration against both austerity and racism. It has to be the next destination for the whole of the movement. That demonstration can appeal both to those who want to fight against racism and to some of those working class people whose lives have been torn apart. And our slogans have to be slogans that unite both aspects of this. Our slogans will be Tories out, migrants in on that demonstration. And a wonderful slogan that my friend Charlie Kimber came up with some time ago, I think, don't blame the Romanians, blame the Etonians. These are the kind of slogans we need that can unite the anger of austerity with anti-racist agitation. Okay. Last 5 minutes. There's another challenge that faces us on the left, because sadly, in the wake of the most colossal crisis the Tories have ever seen, some of the vile Blairite filth decided to create an equally big crisis inside the Labour Party. And the only way of interpreting the action of the Labour MPs, I think today, is that they would rather see a Tory in Downing Street than see a socialist in Downing Street. And I want to make it absolutely clear that we are on the side of Jeremy Corbyn fighting against the right wing in his own party. We don't think this struggle is limited to those people who join the Labour Party. We think that everyone on the left can be part of this struggle, because a central thing that we do to defend Corbyn is mobilising outside Parliament, mobilising on the streets, going to the kind of demonstrations that have been called this weekend, and continuing to build a movement against racism and austerity that stands for the kind of things that Jeremy Corbyn stands for. The critical thing in this battle is we continue to build this movement against austerity and racism and to defend Jeremy Corbyn. The final point I want to make in conclusion is this. The political crisis that we're seeing at the moment is not a blip. Politics in Britain will never return to normal. This, if you like, is the new normal for us. And faced with this, the critical question is not to divide the left between left Remain and left exit people. That's yesterday's argument. That argument is done. The critical thing that we have to do today, and both myself and Shahrar are going to try and offer this, is to try to provide a way forward for the whole of the left. And we should be clear that the intensity of the political crisis is not going to diminish. Both of the major parties in British politics face now irreconcilable contradictions. The Conservative Party are promising to restrict migration from the EU. The business leaders are demanding access to the European common market. And the European Union has turned around and said you can't have one without the other. How are the Tories going to resolve this contradiction? It's not at all clear to me that they can. The Labour Party is going to remain in crisis. Even if Corbyn wins in the short term, it's absolutely clear the MPs have voted no confidence in Corbyn, the Labour Party has voted no confidence in the MPs. How are they going to square this circle? The crisis will continue. The situation is so messed up, by the way, that the Scottish National Party have now requested that they become the official opposition in the British Parliament that they actually want to break away from. This is a bizarre situation in British politics. But we have to understand, even if the main parties survive their crisis, and it's not clear that they can survive their crisis intact, that the process of leaving the European Union, of disentangling Britain from the European Union, will throw up crisis after crisis after crisis, not in weeks and months, but over the course of years. This process will be presided over by a capitalist class and politicians who are bruised by the result of this referendum and are deeply, deeply damaged. In this context, there will be opportunities thrown up for the left to shape them if we can come together to seize those opportunities. So I say to all those people in this room, whether you're on the left exit side or the left remain side, that's not the point. The point is that we come together, demand a new election, defend Corbyn and everyone else on the 16th of July to continue the fight against racism and austerity. Thank you.
But I'm now going to pass over to Shahrar Ali, the Deputy Leader of the Green Party.
So thanks very much for your warm welcome, Sarah and others, in particular for encouraging me when you heard that I was substituting for Natalie, and you haven't even heard what I had to say yet, so that's very kind of you. So what I do want to try and outline is where I think the main challenges are for anybody interested in the future of these isles, anybody interested in rights and social justice, and I'll outline what I see. I'll warm towards the end, towards where I see the main challenges are, including some of the politics of the day, but also what I take to be some of the dead ends, which I feel, instead of us just imploring people, inviting them to stand united, I think we do need to address some of the concerns and issues that people may have had, and by all means then pacify them, if you will, in that way. But let me start with sort of an anecdote, really, which just demonstrates the scale of the impossibility of predicting, really, how people may even have voted. So I was coming out of one of the recording studios on the day of the referendum and passing through the revolving doors, and I came across Lindsay German. She's not here today, is she? No. So I won't be giving away too much, I'm sure, because she was actually talking about this as I was leaving and she was going in. And I said, what a disaster for the country if it goes the wrong way. And I could tell from the pause and the expression that she wasn't going to be voting my way. So we had a bit of a little discussion there, quite insightful. And she said, look, and it stuck with me, and I thought how right she was. There's racism either way. Whether we stay in or whether we go out, that is going to be one of the main items on the agenda that we are going to have to overcome. And really we've seen, I think, in the aftermath of the result, the main problem, one of the main problems is that those racists amongst the voters have fallen into the trap of assuming that everybody who voted with them is also a racist. So they've been emboldened. We're seeing now, we're hearing, even in London, which was strongly pro-in, we're seeing and experiencing all that volatility and all the ugliness that racism can provide for us on a daily basis. And it's a disgrace, and it's something that we are going to stand up and fight against in a united fashion. But just then think, in the same way that somebody that I've done a lot of cross-party, non-party political working with and sort of Stop the War in other places, Lindsay German, in the same way that it wasn't easy to predict. Not only are we not going to fall into that ludicrous trap of caricature, even outside the debating studios, we shouldn't have been doing it inside either, but we mustn't fall into that. We need to ask people, we need to sort of engage and ask them, what reasons did you have? And you'll find, even in my own case, I think one of the reasons why I might have been even moderately persuasive from time to time is that I was appealing to undecideds. And it's because there is a lot weighing on both sides. I've sort of had the opportunity to work in the European institutions, and I've seen how excessive and ludicrous they can be. And when we talk about the democratic deficit, yeah, you see it there writ large, not necessarily any worse than it is in our own country, but at the same time, there are problems there. When you think about the neoliberal agenda and TTIP, these are strong arguments, potentially, against leaving the European Union. So when all the facts are in, when the judgments and the balance of probabilities are in, you may find yourself somewhere on the fence. And I think if we then remind ourselves in non-dogmatic fashion of all the reasons that we may have allowed to remain silent while we were arguing for the other side. So outside of campaigning mode, I think we can then acknowledge and recognise that there were always reasons on either side. And I guess for me, I always strongly pushed within the sort of internationalist dimension and flavour of the European Union, which was the thing that, for me, as a Green, I felt was most important and vital for us. That is to say that if the EU didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, because there were so many pollution effects, so many climate change emergencies that we had to deal with collaboratively and cross-border, that we needed to use what was there, imperfect and incredibly flawed that it was. So for me, it was always, there wasn't even the option on the ballot paper, so to speak, but it was, we need to stay in the European Union, but a reformed EU. So what we have now is, okay, outside the European Union, however that actually cashes out, but we still require reform, we always have. So that ambition and that urgency is still there, whichever the result. I think also in terms of false analyses and how a referendum can itself be hugely divisive, is people jump to conclusions about groups of people voting along certain lines, whether it's North versus South or young versus old, certain kinds of demographics. And you will always find counterexamples to that, young people saying that they voted out for a particular reason which you might have expected. So let's not be guilty of stereotyping people in that way as well. We need to understand the reasons why they voted one way or another. And I know Joseph was referring to, the Scottish question, if you will. It's quite remarkable, again, that we can't even predict that people who sought to leave the United Kingdom Union as such would want to do so given, again, where they're given the opportunity. Not only because some who voted to leave, that small, relatively small in that part of the country, some may have hated the EU so much that they're going to change their vote if they were offered a second referendum in Scotland to stay with the UK because they simply don't want to be any part of the pathway back into entry in the EU. So let's not assume that we know at the outset what people's positions or motivations might be in a changed context. Politics is very much about changed context. So let's now look at also, I would suggest, some of the dead ends. Those areas where, and I know some of you may even marched yesterday, people have been marching, they've been in a state of shock, I can imagine, and also rather surprised at the number of dominoes that have been sort of falling since then in terms of the domestic crises that we're facing, or the confected crises that we're facing. But why would I argue that one of the things that we should not be calling for, even though it wasn't the result that we wanted, is a rerun? And there are various forms that sort of these complaints can take. So, for example, let's redo it. Why? Well, one criterion given is that people voted in ignorance. They were lied to. Now, I mean, first of all, that's incredibly patronising, isn't it? To be told that we are the arbiters and the font of knowledge, and all the statistics out there, not that we often look for statistics that confirm our own preconceived position in the first place. No, we'd never do that. We're not guilty of that. But no, because you voted the wrong way, or you were part of that group who voted the wrong way, you did so in ignorance, and that's no way to vote, even though Conservatives do it all the time. Obviously, they're voting in ignorance. Now, what's really wrong with that is that we haven't yet, and God forbid if we ever arrive at a situation where we can police thoughts to such an extent that we can tell why you voted, not just how you voted. And, that's a challenge enough as it is. There was a great deal of scepticism, apparently, in people having confidence in the result. So putting aside that scepticism or suspicion in our governance, in our basic structures to perform elections, why shouldn't we want to be able to tell and police why people have voted the way they have? Because that's up to them. And it's generally, I would argue, the individual is generally the best judge of their interest, even if we think they're not acting in their interest. But it's very important, as J.S. Mill understood, of course, that we shouldn't be paternalistic. Those of us who have positions of authority, we should not assume those decisions on behalf of others. And genuine, true equality in voting and referenda is a wonderful example of this. It's a very sobering opportunity for us to do that, is one person, one vote. And I think that is paramount. The Green Party certainly would want to lower the age of voting so that more people could have got involved in that process. But let's not make the mistake, or the fallacy, if you will, of supposing that people have to answer to us if they've answered the wrong way to what we would have. Another line of attack, if you will, might be to try and undermine the result, would be that it was called for the wrong reasons. Now, no doubt, some of the reasons that have been already articulated and ventilated are suspicious. They are not the right justification that you would think on a matter of this gravity that the Prime Minister of the day should have gone and called it a referendum. But again, I think we have to discount that. Once we've entered into the process, we have to acknowledge that we will stick by the outcome. And ultimately, that's what it's about. Because when I was being asked, and under some pressure, can I predict the outcome, I was never one of those who said at the outset, well, it's going to be easy, it's going to be a shoo-in, we're confident that we're going to get it. I do not underestimate the public to that extent, and I don't assume or presume to know what they would have decided en masse. But I was disappointed, of course. One of the reasons that people are voting also is emotional. And I think that is ultimately our resource. Because emotion isn't just something which people have I got 5 or 10? Oh, plenty of time, yeah. Emotion isn't just something that people change and vacillate over. It's not something that we should devalidate as a reason to vote, because emotion can be rational. You can have an ideal, an aspiration of how you want the world to be, and that isn't necessarily a reason. It's an ideal. It's something that you want. You want to live in a world which is free of conflict and the Blairites and the warmongers of this world getting scot-free, even though we've got the Chilcot coming in a couple of days. So you want to live in that kind of world, and that is something, again, which we can all agree upon. And then the irony, again, of people who may, of course, have voted as a kind of a protest. Now, I can understand, and I do get, and I've heard on talk radio and places where people are quite astonished that they got the result they voted for, but then they feel they didn't really want it, so they're regretting it. Now, that is, I must confess, that is quite a difficult place to be in. Yeah, so you voted as a protest, and you thought normally the protest never wins, and actually it did on this occasion, and you weren't really sure of the consequences of your so doing. But the irony then, if it was an anti-establishment so-called protest vote, is the establishment, essentially, which they were. I would grant you that those people asking for Remain were de facto, and almost analytically true, they were voting for the establishment. They were voting for the current power structure. And I think that there was a lot to be said to try and dislodge that. But if those who are calling for a rerun were to do so, they would only be doing so from an establishment position, and I don't think that's something which I want to be part of. So secondly, we have to. The thing is with democracy, you have to accept the result. And that's all it comes down to. And so the alternative, because people now are almost playing with words. So David Lammy and others are talking about a second referendum. Now, I'm not presuming to say that even the Green Party has got an official position on this yet, as such. But if I have any influence in the matter, I would say also that is a dead end, as I'm calling it. Because if you were to undertake a process of negotiation, and it was one in which perhaps you were going to lessen the risk or the harms collectively to the country, then I think you're doing so in good faith. But it wouldn't then be a basis to go back to the country, I think, and argue, well, we need to just check, now that we've got a better idea about what's in store for us, that they really meant what they said. I think that would be, relatively speaking, an act of bad faith. And I think the real worry then is that for those people who did vote, and either risked or actually it did in fact get their vote overturned. However angry and upset people might be for the vote not going their way the first time round, can you imagine the anger and upset and riots on the street that would occur if that vote was overturned? I think it's quite unthinkable, to be honest. And so I think we have to reconcile ourselves, often for that sort of cosy expression used about for the national interest. But I think we need to do that. And even if, for those of you who are still very anxious about the situation, I think we just do have to take ownership of the result, even if it isn't the one we wanted, because that really is looking after the common interest. It might mean that we're one step back before going 2 steps forward, but that's the nature of politics. So finally, in terms of challenges and the kind of things that the Green Party's been saying, I think we've been, we haven't been, I think the Lib Dems have been reasonably opportunistic about it in terms of, the referendum and trying to get more members signing up and all that kind of thing. We were never like that. I mean, even after the horrific murder of Joe Cox, we had several parties come out and say they're not going to stand. Now, the Greens, actually, we were disinclined to stand as well, but we waited. We weren't included in that list of parties because it took us time, guess what, to check what the local party wanted. Because we're a democratic party, and we're not yet in the situation where we've got the leadership deciding who stands where or what we do in those localities. No, we are at bottom a grassroots political organisation, and sometimes, however inconvenient, it might take time for those results to be known. So we weren't part of that either. But the kind of things that we have been calling for, and Caroline Lucas and others and Natalie Bennett, is a progressive alliance. Now, I'm not particularly fond of the word progressive alliance, yes, but if we understand what's behind that buzzword, I think it simply amounts to something which we've all been doing, we all recognise, and we all understand the meaning of. It's at bottom, it's collaborative, it's co-working, it's cross-party political organisation, it's campaigning either to prevent foreign invasions and foreign interventions and wars. It's doing all those things, campaigning for climate change, and that constitutes, beyond the narrow confines of party politics, looking to the wider political dimension. And we get that. And so for us, for Greens, getting elected, it was never the only form of politics. It's just one of many important modes of operation. So there's campaigning politics, and then there's getting elected. It's not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And once you get that, getting elected is that means to an end, then if you can pursue those ends in a cross-party political fashion, if you can get together and you can say to the other parties, the time has come really to reflect on, in this moment of crisis, whether we can actually engage collaboratively more and try and, if you like, everybody but the Tory party ticket, if we can achieve that in a general election, if it's coming sooner, that might be a good consequential thing that we can do collaboratively. But again, it would have to be put, if there was some high-powered, so to speak, negotiation, it would have to be put to the Green Party's members. And that's not a disclaimer which we're tending to put on our petitions, but it's a disclaimer which I'm very happy to put right on the table and say it would have to be with the consent of the local parties and the Green Party. And that's very important too. So finally, I think one of the the ugly side, I think, that we've seen after the result is what's been happening, the sort of implosion, especially in the Labour Party. And certainly, I mean, the Conservative Party, they're probably so good at this that we don't really see as much of it, out in the open as we do in the Labour Party. But I think this really kind of shows politics at its worst. Because instead of people uniting behind what they're often giving lip service to, which is the national interest, what they're pursuing is narrow, naked self-interest and self-servitude, and who they happen to be flavour of the day. And it's certainly not the kind of politics that I or the Greens want to have any truck with. And finally, I think we do need to think what we mean by leadership. And I, not being a member of the Labour Party, but I was quite heartened to see when Corbyn got the leadership. As far as I was concerned, it was good for the Labour Party to have a leader who they could actually believe in and who reflected the values of that party. And I think it's good in politics for not only people to say what they mean, but things to do what they say on the tin. And it was one of the first time in decades since the Blair years that the Labour Party was able to say that. And I think it's very ugly to see the kinds of backstabbing. It doesn't matter what the numbers of parliamentarians are against him, because that's just groupthink. That's the nature of groupthink. They can be bounced into it. To some extent, those people who denounced him early on, at least you know where they stand. But it's those who were sort of pushed into it, cajoled into it. You don't know where you stand with those people. And I would suggest that the kind of leadership that we need now more than ever is a politics of substance. And Corbyn got his position precisely because he was seen to be and is a person of substance. So why then should he relent on that? The opposite is the case. Those MPs who claim to want to do what's in the interest of the country or the interest of the Labour Party, they should get behind him. Let there be delegation in the party. If there are some things he's not good at, Jeremy, let me help you with that. What's wrong with that kind of culture of politics? Let me help you with that for the good of the party and for the good of the country. And I hope that if Corbyn remains, that yes, let there be deselections, let there be true Labour values and people in that organisation, so that we can have... Well, there you go. I'm not even to be really... I'm getting a text here, aren't I? Yes. Can you stop straying away from other people's inner affairs? No, I'm not going to do that, because it's not just their inner affairs. It's everybody's affairs. Because guess what? Because Corbyn, final seconds, because Corbyn does believe in many of those root and branch things which the Green Party believes in, even in the first few weeks he was talking about unilateral nuclear disarmament or leaving NATO. Now, of course, that might have raised hackles in his own parliamentary Labour Party, but the fact is, in the Green Party, we've always believed that. That's been a common goal, and we've been united in that. So I think, at bottom, it raises the credibility of politics. And one of the main things that I think we have at stake now is to ensure that the kind of leadership which Corbyn stands for, even if he isn't very good at it, even what he stands for, he needs to be assisted in that. And those people who really claim to be the friend of the country and the friend of Labour values, including the Green Party, I think they would stand four square with him at this time. Thank you.
It's funny because there's a lot of people that have said they have discovered lots of new racists since the referendum, but I've actually discovered lots of new anti-racists since the referendum. And what do I mean by that? I mean people that I know have never lifted a finger to fight against racism that now think they can lecture the SWP about the referendum. And I mean people like Labour right-wingers who, for the last few years, I have spent beseeching them to do something about the rise of UKIP, to do something about the xenophobia in society, and who have repeatedly said to me, let's not focus on the racism, Adam, let's focus on the economic issues, you know? So let's just make one thing very clear. Voting to leave the EU is not legitimising racism. Putting controls on immigration on your mugs is legitimising racism. Voting against an organisation that lets migrants drown in the sea is not legitimising racism. Writing to the Daily Express to apologise for letting in too many immigrants is legitimising racism. And there's another new anti-racist in town. I don't know if you've seen him, David Cameron. He said he's really concerned about the rise in attacks since the referendum. And I think we have to be really clear. We're not going to accept the crocodile tears of people like David Cameron. This is a man who referred to migrants as a swarm. This is a man who said multiculturalism has failed. And this is a man who joined in a racist campaign against Sadiq Khan for the mayoral election. But I want to move forward now. I think the key thing we need is activity. And we do need unity, but there's something paradoxical. I think we actually need division as well. The Remain bloc is not a homogenous bloc. There are anti-racists in there that have genuine fears about the rise of racism, and they're our people. We need to divide them from people, say, I don't know, pro-EU liberals that are worried about their pensions and stocks and shares. There's a difference there, and I think we need to bring those people closer to us, and the way we do that is by activity. Now, the reason I say that is you can't do this thing by just arguing with people on Facebook alone. And believe me, I've tried over the last week. It's a lot easier if you can say, as I've done, OK, you're angry about racism. Well, I've set up an anti-racism meeting this week. I've set up a rally in my town this weekend. So come along. If you're really worried about racism, then join us and come along. And I just want to end on this, really. Just a message to the comrades, because I know a lot of people have suffered some ridiculous comments. And we've got a saying where I come from, and it's real, recognise real. And what that means is that the real anti-racists in this country know who the real anti-racists are. They know who organises when the EDL comes to town. They know who organises when Britain First comes to town. They know who it was who was chasing Nigel Farage around this country the last few years. And they know it was us. So I say to the anti-racists, the real anti-racists in the Remain camp, if you're really serious about fighting anti-racism, don't sit on Facebook sneering at working class people. Come and join us, and let's really fight against racism.
Yeah, comrades, I fully support the SWP's analysis of the EU as a pro-capitalist institution that's been bent on driving through anti-working class neoliberal measures such as austerity and privatization. However, I don't believe that was what the referendum was actually about. As an SWP member, I started out as a Lexit supporter, but became increasingly worried about the scale of the anti-EU migrant sentiment that dominated the Brexit campaign. Not that working class voters who voted Brexit were all racists, far from it. There were genuine, legitimate concerns about unemployment, undercutting of wage rates, living standards, and so on. So yes, many working class voters saw the referendum as an opportunity to kick the establishment, to kick the ruling class, but it was largely over the issue of the free movement of labour. And the main victors, I'm sorry to say, were the Tory right and UKIP. You could just see the smile on Nigel Farage's face on the Friday morning to realise that. Sadly, and this is my main point really, because of the current relative weakness of the left, the relatively low level of industrial struggle, Lexit never really got off the ground. And the figure that I saw was that 65% of Labour voters actually voted Remain. Given the relatively low level of industrial struggle and the weakness of the left, the net result was that Lexit merely added to the Brexit vote without being able to shape the debate, without being able to shape the campaign, sadly, tragically. So we were left with a choice of two evils. A choice of two evils, and it was really tough to decide which was the lesser evil. In the end, because of the anti-migrant sentiment that was being generated by the Brexit campaign, I decided, after long internal struggle with myself, that Remain was the lesser evil in that situation. See, comrades, in Ireland or Greece, because of the existence of a mass movement, I would have voted Leave. Absolutely. And of course, since the vote, we've seen a huge increase in hate crimes, not only against EU migrants, but even against people of Indian and Pakistani background. So there is a real danger of the encouragement of racist forces to the right of the Tories. The final point is really about the encouragement given to the far-right forces in Europe. Marine Le Pen in France, but also it's been a boost to the far-right in Sweden, Denmark, and Holland. There is, of course, here a real danger of a collapse into competing right-wing nationalist forces, such as we saw following the collapse of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. Yes, we're against Fortress Europe, but we're also against Fortress Britain, Fortress Germany, Fortress France, and Fortress Greece. Certainly the result has been a blow against the ruling class, but who will benefit from this? Will Brexit encourage working class resistance? I'm sure that workers will eventually begin to resist in a serious way austerity and racism. And it's, of course, very satisfying that the Tory right at the moment is performing the best production of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar that I've ever seen.
You need to finish there, comrade.
Yes, so we have to build, with our European comrades, a workers' movement that is capable in the long run of breaking up the European Union. In the meantime, let us unite, comrades. Let us build the demonstration against racism and austerity on the 16th of July. Thank you.
Yeah, listening to the speaker from the Green, I was struck by, he may have been on a different side. I'm from Ireland. But when you were talking, it really highlighted to me that we're in a very positive fallout from this referendum, because all the things you were talking about are the aspiration of many people in Ireland and who might have voted, and in Britain who would have voted Leave. And one thing that is really important, because you were talking about the democratic deficit of the EU, is that the most resounding thing, and you mentioned a state of shock and so on, but there was cheers and claps in Ireland and Greece because it was such a blow against the elites. And that's our starting point. And that's why it's a positive fallout from this referendum. It's also interesting that when you talked about, they wouldn't possibly overturn the vote. Well, as you know, probably in Ireland, in France, so in France in 2004, in Ireland 2001, in Ireland 2008 with Lisbon, they did overturn the bloody vote. People voted against, and the interesting thing is, when we're thinking about the democratic deficit of Europe, every time the mass of people vote on any aspect of Europe, they reject it. And we must, so even though that may not be the focus that we'll be looking at now, in the future we've had something lifted from our eyes. And in Ireland, people have mentioned that the EU has constantly been used as an alibi for our ruling elites. First of all, the EU ruling elites are horrendous. I mean, you get Christine Lagarde, who is now in the Troika, who tells us to pay tax when she doesn't pay a penny tax because she's in the IMF. which, according to the EU, they categorise as an international organisation and therefore exempt of tax. You know, this is the kind of logic of the EU. So when we have learnt that those EUs are an obstacle for our political move towards the left, because in Ireland, when that directive came out from Europe and told us that we have to vote water, Sinn Féin in Ireland voted Remain in the north. And yet they will be there to have to explain that why did they vote Remain when that same directive is attempting to demobilise the largest mass mobilisation that we've seen. So there's a logic. The most encouraging thing is that the cheers that were in Ireland and People Before Profit for the Brexit is the positive thing. New possible political alignments. I mean, certainly in Ireland, all sorts of things, north and south, are raised by that. But more importantly, the key thing is that we are wiser about Europe. Europe has been an obstacle to the growth of the left, and we will go into the battles ahead on racism, on austerity, against the organisation that is permanent austerity, which is the EU.
I've got a question to be read out here. Is mass deportation possible? If so, what can we do as socialists to stop it? And after Gary will be Tash Shifram.
Yeah, just to come back on what Sabi was saying about why he had to vote for Remain. I think it's looking at things totally the wrong way around. My partner's from Wales, what people describe as white working class. I believe there's actually one working class, black and white, and gay and straight and so forth. But anyway, let's go with that narrative for a moment. One of my partner's sisters works in the DVLA, which is one of the biggest workplaces in Wales. Her crew on her team in the office were saying, well, which way should we vote? We're a bit unsure about the EU and all the arguments. It's all a bit confusing. So she said, well, if I were you, I would vote to leave so we can give Cameron a good kicking. And that's why they voted to leave. And her neighbour, she lives in a council estate, her neighbour said, I've got this leaflet from Remain, but none of it relates to me. And she went through it. It's got stuff about holidays that are going to be more expensive, but I haven't been on holiday for 10 years, she said to Julie, because she's in a low-paid job. It had their point 2, that we're going to stop multinationals destroying our lives. Hang on, what about Tata Steel that's destroying the steel industry of Wales and the EU's done nothing about it? House prices are going to go down. Well, that's very interesting, but I live in a council house. How's that going to affect me? Your investments are going to be damaged. I don't have any stocks and shares. These people don't know how to speak to working class people. That's why they lost it on their terms. If they did want to win those people, they could have done something very, very simple. They could have nationalised or renationalised the steel industry in Port Talbot, and they could have won some of those people to perhaps believe in the European Union if you wanted to believe in that rubbish organisation. And I go on the question about racism, I think is really, really important, because as Comrade said, it's a strange number of people that are jumping up and down are saying that they're now anti-racist. Well, let's remind ourselves that the racism predates the election. Actually, it wasn't because, there has been a spike, I believe, actually because of the way the result went, but actually it was going on before the election and during the election. You know, a Nazi killed an MP during that election. Where do they get their ideas from? Maybe it's something to do with the fact that attacks on Muslim women rose last year in 2015 by 327%. Where was the Mail? The Mail was egging on the racist attackers. Where were all of these Murdoch papers? They were the ones that are building the hate. They're the people that are building the Remain campaign. By the way, Murdoch's papers were split on both sides of the argument. And I think that to finally say that actually where does racism come from in modern society today, it's based on the labour market and the division of the labour market over who gets what. Karl Marx saw it happening in his day, and he talked about how the weakness of, to the extent that it was weak, of the British working class could be understood by its hatred of the Irish people and how that hatred is kept alive by the comic papers. It's exactly the same today. And so I'd urge people to actually take it as actually a step forward, but we've actually put a boot into the European Union. And I think we could take it beyond that into a huge demonstrations of literally hundreds of thousands of people on the 16th of July when we march against racism, but crucially also against austerity. We've got to get rid of the sewer that creates the filth in the first place, which means getting rid of capitalism.
I want to talk about immigration. We're always being told that no one's allowed to talk about immigration. No one talks about immigration. In fact, as we're all aware, we hear about immigration all the time, mainly from people who are against it, and we hear very, very virulent things. I want to, I suppose, repeat a couple of points that have already been made both from the platform and the floor for emphasis, really. It's true, of course it's true, that the Leave vote is a big working class expression of rage and anger at poverty, at austerity, a complete disconnect from a political system that doesn't represent people, that doesn't stand up for people's needs, a Labour Party that until very recently showed absolutely no sign at all of fighting for people's needs. That is true. That is a huge level of anger. It's also true that some of that legitimate anger has been channeled illegitimately into opposition to immigration and fear of immigration and fear of immigrants. As Joseph pointed out, people do have contradictory ideas in their heads at the same time, and I don't think we can ignore either of those things. We have to relate to the fact that working class people are angry. We also have to tackle the arguments about immigration. That is a debate that's going on, actually, ironically enough, across Europe. There is a polarisation because the centre ground, the austerity politics, no one is interested in that anymore. Ordinary people are bitter and fed up. Some of that is going to the radical left, some of that is going to the racist right. We need to tackle that, as people have said, by fighting against both austerity and racism. And we have to actually have those arguments about immigration. If you look at the official Remain campaign page, it's quite funny, it doesn't actually mention immigration one way or the other. So all you're having is this festering filth from Nigel Farage and the like. You know, it is true that there was racism being whipped up and there's been racism in society before this campaign. But it went up a notch because when Nigel Farage is putting those posters out full of hordes of evil brown people coming here, you know, that's what actually legitimises some of the attacks that people have been facing in the street. And I think we have to think of ways of dealing with those arguments about immigration and turning the anger back into the direction of opposing the Tories and the bosses. We need to do that. We have to do that actually not just by... I don't want to knock people who've been doing stuff to support the refugees in Calais, but it's one thing to talk to people who are sympathetic to refugees and to migrants and raise money and get goods from them and go to Calais. That's great. It's another thing to go and talk to the people that are anti-immigration, and that is what we have to do. We have to win those arguments inside the working class, up and down this country, in London, but also in mining communities that have been devastated, in the industrial north that's been devastated. We have to have real arguments about immigration.
You need to stop there, comrades.
Sorry, just one more thing. Those arguments mean telling people where the housing has gone, telling people that we have lost 3.5 million council homes since Margaret Thatcher has been in power, not taken by immigrants, taken by politicians, taken by the rich, taken by property speculators. It is concrete arguments that we need to get through. We need to find a mechanism of having those arguments on a mass scale, and we need also, I think, to reinstate the campaigning that we were having a couple of years ago against UKIP, because if we leave the field to the only people that want to talk about immigration, we will leave it to the people that want to scapegoat immigrants, that want to divide this country, that want to attack black and Asian people. We have to fight for unity. We have to deal concretely with arguments about immigration.
Yeah, I've just got another one to read out, which is from Robbie Spence from the Colchester Green Party, who says, let's draw some hope from the high turnout in the EU referendum, 71%, which is higher than any recent election. This shows that voter turnout would probably go up under a proportional representation system. Let's make PR a basic element of progressive alliance that is being advocated by Caroline Lucas and others. After Mark George, I will take Fran Manning.
I imagine in the next 2 weeks, many of us will be having discussions with people, particularly people who voted Leave, about the demonstration on the 16th of July. And I just want to highlight two arguments, one in relation to austerity, one in relation to racism. As far as austerity is concerned, ask them, who brought in austerity? It was brought in by the Tories to protect their banker friends and make the working class pay for the crisis. Ask them about racism. Was it Romanian workers who come here to pick strawberries or stand in the fields of Lincolnshire cutting cabbages who destroyed 11,000 jobs in British home stores? No, it wasn't. It was a billionaire man who pays no tax in this country because he lives abroad, who destroyed those jobs. And many of you will have noticed that the interesting similarity between the amount of money that he filched, he stole out of that company, he had no right to it, around about 580 million, and a remarkably similar amount that is now missing from the pension fund of the British Home Stores workers. So don't let anyone tell you that it's the Romanian family living round the corner who are the causes of our problems. The problem is caused by people like Philip Green and his class who always do this to us, and somehow or other, because of the ownership of the press, it's never put on the front page that it's Philip Green who's destroying jobs all around the world. It's always blamed on Romanians and people of that sort coming into this country and taking our jobs and so on. So we have to be very strong on the arguments. Austerity is a political choice of our ruling class to do down the working class and make us pay. And on racism, we have to point the finger where it belongs. It's got nothing to do with Romanian workers and everything to do with the rich who continue to steal what is rightfully ours.
Okay, I think it's really great that Shahrar's been talking about more cooperation. I think we definitely need more of that on the left, and we really need to step up to the task right now. But I think that we should be clear that any progressive alliance would not be progressive if it included the Lib Dems. I think that's really important, okay? Not only is Tim Farron a homophobe, the Lib Dems are widely reviled for their total sellout of students when they voted to triple tuition fees after they promised to abolish them. And also, let's not forget they were in government with the Tories. So I really hope that they wouldn't be included in any sort of progressive alliance plans. We do need cooperation, but cooperation of those actually on the left. I'd also then like to send an invitation to the Green Party to be part of the demonstration that's being jointly organised by Stand Up to Racism and the People's Assembly on the 16th of July. It's under the banner of Tories out, no more racism and no more austerity. And I think it's fantastic that these two campaigns and these two issues have been combined here, because in reality, they are actually one issue. It's the austerity that's been inflicted under Labour and Tory governments that has allowed the toxic racist climate that we're in now to develop. Because when people complain that they can't get a council house or can't get seen by their GP or can't get a place for their kid at school, you can either say as a politician, well, we're going to build council houses and we're going to fund the NHS and education. Or if you don't plan on doing any of that, what you say is blame the immigrants. So this demonstration is about bringing those two issues together, and it's our opportunity to put our issues on the agenda, to say that it's wrong that homeless people are dying on our streets when there are over 500,000 empty homes in this country, to say that it's wrong that millions are relying on food banks, and it's wrong that thousands of pensioners are dying each year because they can't afford to heat their homes in one of the richest countries on earth, and that we're sick to the back teeth of seeing refugees and migrants blamed for it. So I sincerely hope that the Green Party will support this demonstration, help us to build it, join us on the day, and help us fight for the new kind of politics that we desperately need now.
I've got 5 minutes, but I won't require that long, because one of the Colchester Greens stole my thunder about PR, which I was waiting to say a bit about. But of course, proportional representation is very important. It would have to be another referendum, I guess, and it wouldn't be, what would be an offer would be genuine, not the alternative vote. As far as, I think it's good, and I'm often overwhelmed actually by the passion which delegates show at these conferences, and you should give yourself, if not a virtual pat on the back, a pat on the back, because I think it really just shows that politics, it's in your heart and your head and your blood, really. You can't leave it behind. It's with you all the time. And the question then is that, just to introduce a bit of dissent, if I may, with the last questioner, it's challenging, isn't it? Should we have any kind of alliance with the Lib Dems? Well, of course, they've shown themselves to be a pretty bankrupt political party, the way that they've done politics. And even the idea of alliances and alliance making, it's potentially a kind of a compromise. The very reason that you're in a particular political party suggests that they and only they are the ones that you truly believe in and would want to get behind. So an alliance would suggest some form of compromise or meeting ground. Now, I mean, I've been described by somebody as a man of integrity and action, of course, but the thing is, principle is important in politics, and politics, power without principle isn't worth having. But at the same time, I'd probably be prepared to shake the hand of Tony Blair if I thought it would have saved the life of one Iraqi. So there is a calculation to be had occasionally. And maybe within those discussions, it wouldn't be necessarily that we are emboldening or demonstrating that we're okay with the Lib Dems from now on. It might just require us to say, yes, there could be some MPs that we will all have a stake in deciding who is going to run on that alliance. So we have to occasionally look at the bigger picture, and I think that's what this is about if it's going to work. Okay, maybe it won't. Just let me say something finally about migration. Are Sabi and Wayman here? Because I think they were on the platform earlier. Because it's absolutely fantastic work that they're doing on Stand Up to Racism. And, we stand full square with that. It's so important that we use our voices and say this. I've been out to the Calais jungle and I've met with them. Sorry, not Wayman and Sabi there, but the refugees. The kinds of crises that we're causing around the world due to our bombs raining upon people, and we're not taking co-responsibility. And I do despair and I do hope that in this new arrangement in the EU, that we take greater, not less responsibility, not 20,000 Syrian refugees over 5 years. That's a pittance, it's nothing. It's not our responsibility. And I think that it's not demonstrating the scale of our responsibility. And what I saw in the jungle was actually very heartening. I was being offered food, all different types of food. There was a community there. They were resilient. They were extraordinary. And many of them, yes, wanted to come to the UK. Guess why? They spoke English. They had family here, all very good reasons. They wanted to settle. They were fleeing from persecution. And we gave them our solidarity, the Greens did. And the thing is that they had a community there. And it just shows what is that glue that binds people together. It's solidarity, it's hope, it's aspiration, it's all those things that they had. It was a community and a humanity, a common humanity. And when we think we don't want there to be any more Alan Kurdys washed up on the Mediterranean, we've got to ensure that when we're taking, at bottom, the referendum is about power. And yes, even though I was on the other side, I will stand firm that that result must stand because it's democratic. And if we enable power structures as such they are, to overturn that, that would be a disaster. The same kind of disaster that we still have when people can organise a convoy, a humanitarian relief to Calais, of all things, and they can be prevented from crossing the channel to get to Calais. How disgusting and how despicable is that? So let's remember the one thing that we're always going to be doing, and I was discussing earlier about the left and green politics. I think the theme that I was warming to, which is as relevant in this session, is to do with power, speaking truth to power, and making sure that we address all the injustice and false hierarchy in society today.
I want to again thank Shahrar for his comments, and there's an awful tendency to falsely characterise the workers as one uniform mass of people. And in this referendum, what we've seen is attempts to caricature the working class as two uniform masses of people. And I think what we've managed to go beyond in this discussion is a characterisation in which everyone who says we should vote leave the EU is stupid and racist, and everyone who says we should remain is a idiot neoliberal yuppie. And it's really important that we get beyond that discussion and talk about what's really happening in this crisis. So I really welcome the discussion we've had. Let me say, first of all, in response to what Adam was saying, you see, I agree entirely that the architects of the Prevent strategy and the architects of the Iraq war and the architects of the scapegoating of refugees and migrants have no place in an anti-racist movement. I will not be marching alongside David Cameron, Tony Blair, or even Bob Geldof, I hope, in the coming weeks. But I'd say this as well. You see, if someone who voted Remain says now I have woken up to the horrors of racism and I'm worried about what's going to happen to migrants, I would say to those people, fantastic. I don't care where you've come from, I don't care why, but I will march alongside you and I will defend those communities alongside you. And I will stand up to racism alongside those people. I think it's very, very important. Third point I want to make, Shahrar mentioned bumping into Lindsay German. She obviously gets around quite a lot. Lindsay is one of the people who, along with me, founded the Lexit Left Leave campaign. And I'm very pleased that we had people from the SWP, like myself, people who've played a very honourable role in the anti-war movement, working together to build a principled campaign. I'm very pleased by that. But it's not what makes me most proud to be an SWP member. What are the things that actually make us proud to be SWP members? The thing that makes me proud to be an SWP member is this, that a few years ago, the British National Party had over 50 councillors in Britain, had 2 MEPs, had an assembly member in the London Assembly, and were getting millions of votes. The last general election, the British National Party nationally got 1,667 votes nationally. So a handful more votes than a political party called Residents for Uttersford. And I don't even know where Uttersford is, so that's a big deal. And they have not a single elected representative in this country. That's what makes me proud to be an SWP member. Something else that makes me proud to be an SWP member, when the English Defence League came to East London and tried to march past one of the biggest mosques in London, I'm very proud that we were outside that mosque with the local Bangladeshi community saying they will not pass. And they didn't pass. They didn't make it past that mosque. They didn't make it into Tower Hamlets that day. And I'm very proud that in the midst of this referendum campaign, we organised, along with other forces, a convoy to Calais of 300 plus vehicles to take aid to Calais. We got to the border. As Shahrar says, we were stopped at the border. What did they do at the border? We protested. We said we're not prepared to be stopped. When we couldn't get through that border, they went back to the French embassy and protested again. And they said 2 things. First of all, we need aid for these people. But secondly, why are these people here? Why aren't they in Britain? How do we get them here? We need to open the border. And those are the things that actually make people proud to be a socialist and proud to be in a socialist organisation. And I want to say, finally, something about socialist organisation, because Sabi says this, it's a blow to the ruling class, but who benefits? Well, that's a big question. But we're not passive observers to this process. The question of who benefits from this crisis will be settled in the workplaces, on the streets, in the communities, and it will depend in large parts by what we do to face off this crisis. See, no one joins the SWP to fight a referendum. I mean, I hate fighting. I pray that I never have to fight another referendum again. Nobody does it like that, and we shouldn't be judged by the results. This is a secret, but I don't control 1 million voters in Britain. We don't determine the outcome of this referendum. Don't judge us by that. Judge us by how many people are on the streets on the 16th of July. That's how you should judge the SWP. How many people can we mobilise? Because actually we join a socialist organisation to change the world, and God knows this world needs changing. It's about 70 years ago that Nye Bevan said that the Tories are lower than vermin because they condemned millions of first-class people to semi-starvation. Today, in 2016, in the 5th richest country of the world, we have 1 million people dependent on food banks. 70 years of progress, and this is what it's come to. So I say to people in this room, if you want to be part of those struggles, if you want to get involved in those struggles, but if you want to also end this rotten system, which means that in 70 years' time our children are not going to be fighting the same struggles as we're fighting today, get involved, join the socialist movement, and join the SWP. Thank you.